So we're almost at the end of Easter season. We have just one more Sunday in the Easter season. Next Thursday is Ascension Day. We all know what happens on the Ascension. Jesus ascends, and then he's gone. And so we're in the last days of the gift that is the Easter season. Each of the church seasons brings us its own particular gifts, because the church recognizes that the spiritual life for each one of us has its seasons, and that there are different themes in our lives, or maybe in our course of a day, or in the course of the years, that are affirmed or have light shed on them by one season or another. So those of us who keep the whole church year are able to benefit from the perspective on God for our lives that comes from each of these seasons. So think for a moment before we fleetingly move on to Pentecost, what it is that this Easter season has given us as a gift, or as a series of gifts. First of all, of course, it has given us the resurrected Christ. For 3 weeks, we heard stories of the resurrection, that Christ was not defeated by death, that he was alive again. But then those stories stopped. And it is as if the disciples were sitting around saying, well, he's going to be gone now. What did he tell us about his relationship with us going forward? And so somebody said, well, you remember that thing about the Good Shepherd? How he would be our shepherd? We would know his voice. He would know us. We would follow him. Maybe that's the clue for how we will still be related to him going forward. And so we celebrated Good Shepherd Sunday. We had last week a Sunday where he says to them that they are to love one another. This is the new commandment I give. So another disciple says, well, maybe the clue to staying related to the risen Christ has to do with loving one another. And today's story comes out of that same context, that 14th chapter of John, in which Jesus is saying over and over again to them, do not be afraid. Don't worry. I'm going away, but I'm going to be here. Today he says, I'm going away, but the Father and I will come and make our home with you. The Father will send the Holy Spirit, and then that Holy Spirit will help you remember all the important stuff, will help you recognize my voice in the context of your lives, will strengthen you to carry on this ministry. So both in its literal form of the resurrection when Christ appears to his disciples, and in its more symbolic form, what that means to us in terms of going forward for our own lives. That is one of the great gifts of the Easter season. Probably its primary one. But as we've gone along through this season, we have also been reading, if you've noticed, 2 other readings every Sunday. We've been reading from the book of the Acts of the Apostles, and we've been reading from the book of Revelation. And we do that quite deliberately because the Acts of the Apostles is the record of what happened in those early days that made it possible for this tiny little Jewish group to take their faith from person to person and have it spread to the ends of the earth and spread into our own lives right here. how is it that this happened? It's miraculous that this small little group of 12 Jewish fishermen and their accompanying families, how is it that spread to the ends of the earth? And so we have heard during the course of this season some of those great stories. The stories about how Paul, who was a persecutor, gets converted and begins preaching the word. With a story of how Peter, who is the head of those disciples, comes to realize that, in fact, this is good news not just for Jews, but for Gentiles as well. And that is the key moment in which the faith is opened up to all the world. When it becomes clear that it's not just a Jewish movement, but it has a life outside itself. So we've heard those stories, and it is also the time when we've heard the story, the beginning of the stories of Paul and his travels. He goes on these long journeys, you know, and he touches the lives of individuals. This is the story we heard just this morning is from his second journey. His first journey sort of took him up over the island of Cyprus and up along the coast of southern Turkey. Today's journey has him going up through the heartland of Turkey, across the rugged terrain that runs just about 50 or 60 miles inland along through the land of what we call Turkey today, going from little village to little village. And in one of those villages, he runs into Timothy. He becomes a disciple and goes along, tags along with him. And then today we hear the story of how he has a vision that he is supposed to cross over from Turkey to Europe, Turkey to what is now Greece. And so they go on a boat journey that's reported in our reading today, and they come to the town of Philippi. And as was clearly his wont, he went outside the city on the Sabbath to a place where Jews or Jewish sympathizers might be gathered for some prayer. And one of those sympathizers, she was not herself a Jew, she was probably a Gentile, but a sympathizer with the Jewish religion, heard him preach, and she is touched by it and says, I want to be a part of that. And she is baptized, and then she says, come and live with me while you do your work. This is the story of how the church is born. It's born by women like Lydia, who was a maker of purple cloth, and that's all we know about her, except that her heart was open. And she responded to that openness with an invitation to hospitality in her own home. So she is the cornerstone, becomes that cornerstone where the church in Philippi is born. And that church, of course, becomes a very important part of the story of early Christianity and the letters that Paul wrote to Philippi. The story of the birth of the church is the story of people like Lydia, just regular schmoes like you and me, who have open hearts and opened our lives to whatever that spirit might be. So one of the gifts of this season, alongside the gift of our relationship to Jesus ongoingly as the risen Christ, is this story, this history upon which we stand. It's a stand, we stand on the history of the Lydias of the world, the ones who have actually brought us this faith. It's a history, surely, that includes Peter and Paul and all the big names, but it's mostly a story about you and me and the folks who are undramatic in every other way, just selling our purple cloth and taking Christ in and building on that. That's the second gift of the Easter season that we have. And the third gift that we've been is the other reading that we've been hearing all season, which is from the gift of the book of Revelation, a magnificent book about addressed to the 7 churches that are a part of all this territory around, mostly in southern Turkey now. And the letter is addressed to them and gives them a vision of how they are to survive in an atmosphere of persecution. They are subject to the powers of the Roman authority, and they are in various ways being persecuted. And this is a story that says to them that if they hold to their faith and to all that they know about Christ, they will ultimately be triumphant. It's a great story because it's got beasts, it's got this big beast, and it's got dragons, and it's got all sorts of graphic things that make for great graphic novels. But in the end, it comes down to what we heard today, which is that vision of the very end. Don't worry. In the end, it is the new Jerusalem, the new heaven and the new earth, in which Christ reigns as the light, in which Christ is the life and the breath of all creation. Don't worry. That is what ultimately is important and ultimately will prevail. So we're going to hurry on now from the Easter season. We're going to get on to Pentecost and all that means, and then the long journey through the summer and the fall, walking along with Christ and trying to absorb his teachings. But in our hearts, we will carry this season, knowing that Christ, the risen Christ, is still with us, that we still are empowered by him, knowing that our faith is built on a history of faithful people, and that our future is in the hands of a faithful and loving God. Amen. Amen.